Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor fans? Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Monday, November 11th, and today Grace and I will spend some time recapping Baylor men's basketball victory over number 16 Arkansas. And after that, we'll take a few minutes just to briefly preview Baylor football's next opponent, West Virginia, who the Bears will travel to face in Morgantown on Saturday afternoon. So, Grayson, let's start with the basketball game. Obviously, massive bounce-back win for Scott Drew Singh after that loss to Gonzaga, which was just a drumming. We talked about that last week, but come back to beat number 16 Arkansas, 72-67. Now 1-1 on the season. Jaden Nunn led all Baylor scorers with 16 points, but 5 Bears in double figures for that game. No Langston Love again, so you hope to get him back soon. But the fact they win this game without Langston Love, mentally bounce back. So I haven't played a home game, two games in a row against ranked opponents. Grayson, man, what are your initial thoughts on this game and how Baylor looked against Arkansas? And what big changes did you see even from the Gonzaga game earlier last week?
I think, like, big picture, the thing that really stood out to me is just the difference between when you're playing a team that has a bunch of guys returning versus playing a team that's more similar to you. Arkansas's got a lot of new faces, like a ton of new guys that they're kind of integrating in, as well as a new coach in John Calipari. And so this matchup very much favored Baylor as opposed to that first matchup, which I'm going to be honest, I think I underestimated just how big of a deal it was. Gonzaga they were so experienced, knew each other's game so well, and Baylor didn't. And so they really exploited everything that Baylor had for them. But you turn to this Arkansas game, and it's like Baylor was able to make adjustments. They ran the 1-3-1 a whole lot more, kind of a, as they were saying it on TV, an amoeba zone. They were doing a lot of that, kind of switching from zone into man during possessions. It was really cool to see a nice wrinkle that they added, and it helped them rebound as well. I think it did a lot of things for them. I think they were very active in that zone, and it allowed them to get stops. It allowed them to really, I think, stifle Arkansas for stretches. Arkansas was settling for deep threes, and it's like, okay, if you're going to hit 10 NBA three-point range threes in this game, then we're probably going to lose, but we're going to bet you're not going to be able to hit that many of them. And that's kind of how this game played out. I think a few other takeaways. I mentioned before the season, I thought Norchad Omier was going to be their leading scorer, and I feel even more strongly about that because I just think he's going to be the most consistent guy. Like, you look at this team, they have a bunch of guards that can give you 15 on a night or give you, 20 on a night, but they don't have another post guy that's going to give this for them, like, at all. And so I think to see him actually get fed in the post and watching him work and watching him get crucial buckets for this team was really important. I think it bodes well for their future. There were other things, but I think those were some of the main ones. Obviously, VJ had a really nice performance. Nice to see him kind of come into his own a little bit. And there were others as well. But I think overall, a very nice team win and a very nice bounce back after playing a very ready Gonzaga team, who also, by the way, beat Arizona State, I guess, last night as well. So they're now 2-0. They beat another Big 12 team, and Arizona State put up a much better fight, though. I think it was tied with maybe 4.5 minutes to go in that game. So Gonzaga, I think they were very prepared for the Baylor game, and then maybe there's going to be a little bit of a drop off. But I think in general, that's a really good team, and Baylor rebounded nicely.
Yeah, I think the defensive strategy was really interesting because for the last several years, we haven't seen it that much. And then all of a sudden it's there present for an entire game. And I just mean over long courses of time. So it makes me wonder, because of the lack of consistent size, if this is something that they could go to where, and I'm talking about bigs. They're a pretty long team. They just don't have Josh. That's a big that's going to move around pretty decently. But overall depth inside is just not there. And you mentioned on the offensive end, but it makes me wonder if that could be something that we see for the rest of the season really consistently, or if that was just a matchup situation with Arkansas and felt good about it because it looked good and they moved well. It was almost like they had been practicing it more than just for this particular game. Maybe there's something they worked on in the offseason, but it was nice to see that come together. And if that's something, I mean, we've seen it be effective for Scott Drew teams in the past. Now, are you going to win a national championship with it? That's going to be difficult to do. But I think they kind of have those pieces that make it pretty intriguing for the entire season to say, hey, if we want to run it 30 or 40 minutes in a game, we can. They just showed they could do it against Arkansas.
Right. I think the thing that is tough right now is without Langston, you're playing a lot of undersized guards.
Yeah.
And you're playing multiple undersized guards together. And so I think maybe when they get Langston back, they'll have more of an option to go to man. But I think after watching the Gonzaga game, it was very clear. Like, if you're going to switch everything and you're going to ask Rob Wright to front a post player or challenge a guy at the rim in the post, like, that's just not going to work. And so the other part about it is I think the zone for some parts, you know, I think Norchad Omier, he got caught a few times and ended up having to foul a few times, which clearly is an issue. They just don't have the depth without him. And so, you know, in the man, he was less susceptible to that because he's caught on the perimeter a lot because they're switching so much, which is, I guess, nice. But then on the flip side, it's like he's not in the paint protecting the rim. Yeah. And so then in this zone, at least he's in the paint protecting the rim, but then you got to keep him out of foul trouble. And so there's kind of another part of the conundrum. And so I think that's part of my takeaway, though, is their depth down low. It's scary. Yeah. Josh O had 4 points and 3 rebounds in this game. And it was, you know, noticeable drop off when Norchad left the game and all you had was Josh O out there. And I mean, Norchad's a really good player, but you still expect more from a guy that's been on campus for as long as Josh O has. And then you have Jalen Celestine, who, long, but not a great rebounder. He's just an okay rebounder. And so there it is, that their second best rebounder is VJ. I think, like, as far as effort wise,
8 rebounds against Arkansas.
Yeah. And that's tough. That's tough when he's your second best rebounder. So that's definitely a concern. And that remains a concern. It was my concern coming into the year, solidified against Gonzaga. And then I'm still very worried about it right now after this Arkansas game.
Yeah. I think Langston can help them rebounding, but it doesn't alleviate the pressure that you need more size at times. So really anxious to see how that goes. I think, on the same topic, out rebounded 37-32 against Arkansas, which I think with the John Calipari team, the way he's going to recruit, they're going to be big and athletic most of the time, the way they're going to play. So I think that's a decent number, especially after the Gonzaga game. Only 8 turnovers in this game. I think that's as to be expected. I think that throughout the season, you have enough ball handlers and enough guys that have played a lot of basketball that you shouldn't have a ton of them. Even if you're going to be playing 2 freshmen and Rob Wright, VJ Edgecombe quite a bit, like, you shouldn't have to be concerning yourself with turnovers. Norchad Omier, no turnovers in this game from a big, which is terrific. I mean, how often have you seen Baylor bigs the last few years just get the ball and struggle with it once they get it down there? He's not going to do that. He handles the ball well enough. Only 29% from 3, but that was a step up from the first game against Gonzaga. And I think that's only going to get better the more comfortable they get. VJ, I don't remember what his stat line was from the 3, but I don't think he's going to be as bad as he's been the first 2 games. He's not a great 3-point shooter, but I think he's going to be better than what he's shown. I mean, I think with Langston coming back, obviously he's a very good 3-point shooter, and that's going to help him get some of those open looks. So I think this team is going to continue to gel. I mean, I think that's the expectation when you bring in so many new faces, so many moving pieces, and then you throw in an injury. You're only playing 7 guys at this juncture. You really need Langston to get healthy, especially as you get through this, the softer portion of the non-conference to get ready for, St. John's and obviously Tennessee or whoever it might be in the second round of that tournament, and then UConn. But then Big 12 plays here, like, is a short non-conference slate this year compared to previous years because the Big 12 is so small. I mean, so large, the non-conference games get so short. I think, man, I don't want to harp on this too much, but I really like Robert Wright as a point guard. And nothing against Jeremy Roach, but I feel like that you could get away with playing those guys together quite a bit. But I just, maybe it's more for the long term, but I just really like Wright as a point guard. And I mean, that was obvious. He was a good point guard in high school, but already he's just flashed in so many different ways. He had 2 turnovers in the game, but had 2 assists, 10 points, one of the Baylor's double-figure scorers. And overall, man, are you of the school of thought that like he's going to potentially take minutes from Jeremy Roach running the true point guard position for this team?
I think he's going to mix in, and I think that you're going to want him with the ball in his hands on offense. So he's probably going to initiate offense when he is out there. And Jeremy Roach, that's the 2 was his natural position at Duke as well. You know, he's kind of molding his game into being a true point guard. I do have some concerns with Rob, and it's not so much long term. It's not so much like, oh, I'm watching this and I don't think he's a good player, but like on the trap, for instance, he got trapped once against Arkansas and just kind of threw it up and it's stolen, and then they get a layup out of it. There's just a level of length and physicality that you see in the college basketball game that if you face a team that's pressing you, it can be a little overwhelming. And so I do think that he's going to play a lot. I think he's going to have a role on this team all year long. Like, you can see it. The flashes are there. Like, he plays, as Ashley said, the pace that he plays at is his biggest thing. He is so crafty, but he plays at a pace where he controls the game. It's very similar to how Jared Butler was able to control his pace, right? His momentum, where his body went on a given play, and then it allowed him to make passes or create for others or score. For Wright, it's more the passing. For Jared, it was more the scoring. But I do find that very intriguing. But I think when the games matter most, I think Jeremy Roach is going to have to be out there. And I think, you know, what I saw from Jeremy late in that game against Arkansas was pretty good. He did, split a 1-and-1, which I would have liked to have seen him make both, but he also had a really big layup late in the game as well, which was just a veteran play. You know, his defender relaxed and he blew right by him, finished on the left-hand side of the rim. Really nice play there. I just think he's going to be there, a constant for them. Now, could they play together? Maybe. My bet on that, though, is that's probably going to be Langston Love in crunch time as the 2, with VJ as the 3. And then I think Norchad. And then if Celestine can start shooting the ball better, which I think he will, he hasn't shot the ball very well these first couple games, then I think that takes us to another level. The other thing I'll mention about Roach, he hasn't shot the ball well so far, but he's a 41% 3-point shooter from last year. Like, he's going to get going. And if he starts shooting the ball well, then it's going to be really hard to, I think, take him off the court in key moments.
Yeah, and I think that in general, we mentioned that to start this, the entire team shooting wise I think it's just going to get better. You throw in Langston back. It was good to see Jaden Nunn have a good day. 4 3-points made, 7 attempts, and but I think going to continue the discussion about the ability to create from the guard position. VJ's 5 assists were really encouraging. Not that I didn't expect him to be able to do that, but to have 5 in this particular game was really, that was really impressive. And that's with 1 turnover. So I think the strengths of these teams not turning the ball over, it's going to be a long-term deal. But VJ to be able to create, and a lot of that could come in transition. He's getting rebounds, getting and pushing up the floor. He's going to have that ability to do it. The depth of this team is obviously the guard position. Now, do you want VJ to need, to have to get 8 rebounds a game? Probably not. You don't want him to have to be that guy. But for him to get rebounds and to get out in transition is a huge deal. And obviously we've seen what he can do scoring the ball in transition, but to have 5 assists, I don't know what that ratio of assists out in transition was, but that's really encouraging to see. And truthfully, man, like, just being able to have basically 5 guys once Langston gets back at the guard position that all handle the ball really well with VJ on top of that. You worry about the depth at the post position, but the depth at the guard position is so strong that it's going to be a challenge for a lot of teams to slow down all these guys once they kind of start feeling their way and playing together in an entire system.
It will. And I also think, you look at these shooting numbers and you see VJ 1 of 7 from 3, Roach 1 of 4, Celestine 1 of 5. Like, if guys don't have it, that's when Langston Love comes in play, right? So maybe VJ ends up, 1 of 5, and Roach is 1 of 3, and Celestine's, 1 of 4, and then Langston Love is, 3 for 4. Like, there's a counter to that, right? If you have a guy like Langston who's such a good shooter, it really makes it hard for a defense because not all of them are going to have a bad night. And more times than not, 2 of them are going to have a really good shooting night. And then you're in kind of big trouble. I did want to mention a couple things on VJ. This was such an impressive performance that I think is going to get overlooked because the shooting numbers weren't insane. But, man, I'll tell you what. He had the biggest rebound of the game. Late in the game, got the rebound off the miss with like 30 seconds left in the game.
Yeah. The offensive rebound.
Yep, the offensive rebound. Yep.
He skied that one too.
Right. He called off Jeremy Roach late in the game. I don't know if you remember this. He called him off. He was like, no, like he called him away, and then he blew by his man, and that's when Norchad sealed his guy, and then VJ gets fouled. He called off Jeremy Roach. I was like, oh my gosh. And then he goes to the free throw line, makes both free throws in clutch time to win the game. And then not to mention the fact that his block earlier in the game was one of the best blocks you're ever going to see. It's a shame they called a foul. That was not a foul at all.
It was so powerful. I thought they probably felt like they had to call it a foul. Like that's the only thing I could assume.
Spike.
Yeah.
Oh, he met him at the rim. Yeah. It was phenomenal. Wow. Yeah. So VJ, this is an underrated performance by him, and his explosiveness just absolutely jumps off the screen. That he's going to have some crazy good games, but I think the biggest thing for me watching him play, like, this guy's a winner. Like, you can just feel it. You know what I mean? Like, he really wears on a team. And, you know, I love Keontae George and I love Jacoby Walter, and those guys could really score the basketball, right? And really change the game, you know, offensively, but they're not getting that rebound. Like, they're not getting that block. Like, that there's things that he does that other freshmen that Baylor's had in the past could not do. And so it's just a different type of player. I'm curious how that translates as things go forward. But if he starts shooting the 3-point ball well, I mean, there's a chance he's an all Big 12 guy. And I know there was a possibility of that coming into the year, but when you look at Baylor's roster, it's like, you know, can they really have, you know, 2 or 3 guys, and who are those 2 or 3 guys who could be on that team? And I think VJ is definitely making me intrigued about that, because I was very impressed by him despite the poor shooting numbers.
Yeah. So right now, shooting 10% from 3, you expect that number to go up. I mean, even if you just like split the difference and say, hey, you're ending up being a 33%, 34, 35% 3-point shooter, like the game that he plays, if he's shooting at that clip, makes him that much more dangerous.
And that's how he was in most of his high school tournaments, the big ones, the big premier tournaments. He was shooting around that range. Now, college game is different, but he got some really good looks. Like, these weren't really contested threes. Right. He's just not quite making the in rhythm ones yet.
Yeah, you would expect with the depth that Baylor has at guard and their ability to make plays, he's going to get open looks. And those are the ones that you want him to shoot, and obviously you want him to make. You know, and so through 2 games, 7.5 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 blocks, 1 steal, only 2 turnovers per game, which is really strong considering he is averaging 3 assists and he's not a point guard. He's not playing point guard right now. So really anxious to see how he continues to develop. But in general, this team just learning to play with each other. I mean, like, it's not. I mean, truthfully, we haven't seen a Scott Drew team really put together like this. There is a lot of new faces that are going to be asked to play a lot. And the returning guys, there are returning guys, and especially without Langston yet, there are returning guys, but it's still like they're all figuring out how to play together. And so the next couple of games, I think you're going to see this team kind of blossom. They're going to play Sam Houston on Tuesday night in Waco, and then Tarleton State on Sunday in Waco. And not that those games are massive challenges, but they are that ability to continue to gel, really figure out in the game atmosphere how they're going to play. You know, it's just like, you know, figuring out where guys are going on the court. You do that in practice, but it's also in transition, where going the guys really, you know, float to in perimeter shots, or who's running the court really well. And those things are going to emerge. And I'm really anxious to see these things in games that obviously they should win big against Sam Houston and Tarleton, but we're going to learn a lot about this particular team in those 2 games.
Yeah, the Sam Houston game, just for Baylor fans, some expectations here. Sam Houston lost to Nevada by 16 points. So if Baylor wins by 20, 25 points, that's a good performance by Baylor. They're not that bad. I think they'll push Baylor a little bit, challenge them some, and then Baylor will probably run away. And then Sam Houston beat Tarleton State by 30. So the Tarleton State game should be an absolute rout. But I'm very curious about Sam Houston. I think if Baylor doesn't play well, then it could be a close game. And so I'm just curious after these first 2 games, if Baylor just turns right around and it's like, oh, at home, friendly confines of home court advantage. And if they come out and play really well, and then of course followed up with Tarleton State. And like you said, Colt, these two games are really important because it leads right into that Bahamas tournament. And we've already seen, Tennessee looks really good on the other side of the bracket. And obviously you got to get by St. John's as well, who's 2-0 currently.
Yeah. So looking at St. John's, and this is getting way ahead, beat Fordham and Quinnipiac, or Queenie. I don't even know how to say that. Sorry for whoever's listening from Quinnipiac, I guess is maybe how you say it. But yeah, so like they have the schedule, but these two games are super important because you play two top 25 games, obviously against Gonzaga, who's going to, through their non-conference now. I don't know what they have left. I'm sure that Mark Few's scheduled up, but they're going to be top 5 range by the time they begin conference play. And then obviously you don't know exactly where Arkansas is going. But to start off with those two, now you got to kind of, it's like, okay, take your breath, get these played out, work on things you need to work on, whatever you need to really practice on. But there's not a lot of time just to breathe. I mean, they go straight into that tournament and then finish up later, obviously with UConn before New Orleans. They're struggling a little bit this year, 0-2 to start. But Big 12 play begins the end of December. So it's not like you're waiting until the middle of January like we were before. And it's going to be a short non-conference schedule before this team gets into Big 12 play.
Right. And you mentioned Gonzaga's schedule. We're going to learn a lot about them. They play West Virginia in the Bad Boy Mowers battle for Atlanta. So that's going to be a big tournament. They could play, a multitude of teams if they progress. They also play Kentucky in Seattle. And then they play UConn in New York City. So they're going to challenge themselves, and we'll get kind of a better feel for just how good Gonzaga is. But just remember, that was a Sweet 16 team last year that returned 10 guys who played. And then they brought in 2 transfers who are really good. And so it's just like they didn't have to integrate much.
Yeah, and that's going to be, not that they're not going to get better throughout the season, but they're playing at a high level already.
Right.
That would be as if Baylor brought back the roster they did for the national championship season from after the COVID year. Well, you expect them early on to play really well. And for Baylor's sake, you bring in a lot of new faces. You expect there to be some time. You just happen to open with Gonzaga and obviously Arkansas. So go 1-1 in these two games, massive. If you drop both of them, you kind of like, you're not panicking, but then you're like, well, crap, like we're really behind the 8 ball now. So they win against Arkansas. I think that really sets them up for the next couple of games, and obviously going into the Bahamas tournament is big. Is St. John's, and obviously you mentioned Tennessee on the other side of the bracket. To get 2 wins there would be massive.
And this is where you got to build your tournament resume. And, losing by 40 points in the non-conference is not a great way to start, but you rebound by getting what's probably going to be a quad 1 win against Arkansas. That's huge. And so you got to stack those up now, because you do have that really kind of, that's an eyesore, to lose like that. And so they're going to have to make up for it. I think they will. But like you said, I don't, there's going to be times where I think they struggle and where they're still learning each other's game. It really comes down to when they hit Big 12 play. Are they playing at a level that, can get them through the conference slate? Because the conference is just brutal. I mean, we knew it was going to be coming in, and I think we know even more about it now, but I just think Baylor's going to be very tested. So they need to be kind of ready for that by the time conference play rolls around.
Yeah, well, they've already been tested. I mean, as much or more than anybody else in the country through 2 games. So obviously, great bounce back win for Scott Drew's team. Play on Tuesday night against Sam Houston, and then finish up before they go to that Bahamas tournament against Tarleton State. So great recap on basketball, and obviously no football this weekend. So I do think it's appropriate, before we really get into the weeds with West Virginia and what they bring to the table on the football side of things, let's just give a brief discussion about West Virginia, what they did over the weekend against Cincinnati, the way that they're going. We don't really know exactly what West Virginia is going to be on Saturday, especially if Garrett Green's playing or not playing. C.J. Donaldson, their really good large running back, former tight end, is still kind of like he's playing, but he's not. I think the West Virginia fans were really frustrated with that because he was playing. It seems like they're returning him from an injury. But in general, I mean, did you happen to watch that game, keep up with it? And what was your biggest takeaway from their win over Cincinnati, a rivalry game on the road?
I mean, my biggest takeaway is that Cincinnati didn't show up for the first half. And honestly, the only reason they lost that game was pretty much because of the fumble return for a touchdown that they had kind of late in the game. They'd come all the way back think it was 24-21 or something along those lines, or no. Yeah, 24-21. West Virginia was up, and then they returned the touchdown to make it 31-21.
And they had already scored to come back.
Right.
That was going to be the score. They either tied it or put it ahead. And at that juncture, West Virginia couldn't stop them. I mean, through that point of the game, like they were not. And then 7-point swing that quick.
Yeah, I was not impressed with West Virginia. I felt like Cincinnati just played really bad. And that's honestly, that's one of those performances that you're going to look at and go, how the heck did we lose this game? They outgained West Virginia by nearly 200 yards. But when you look at it, they had 3 turnovers and West Virginia only had 1. And that was just flat out the difference in this game. West Virginia really did all of their damage early. That's where Cincinnati just inexplicably didn't show up at the beginning of that game. West Virginia scored a bunch of points, got out to a lead, and then they were just able to maintain that lead because of Cincinnati continuing to turn the ball over. I'm curious if Garrett Green comes back. Nico Martial is fine, but I don't think he's as good as Garrett Green. And I know there's been some discussion on that, but I think Green is much better.
Yeah, no, his playmaking ability. Now, Garrett Green will still potentially turn the football over. He's not the most consistent passer. Like he's a 55-ish% career passer. But yeah, the game it started off Cincinnati drove down the field, scored, get the ball back, going back to score to go at 14-0, 4th down play, interception return for a touchdown. And then it's tied. The next possession, fumble. West Virginia goes back, kicks a field goal. So it's 10-7 when it should have been 14-0. And then it got to the point where it's 24-7. West Virginia did not score again until the fumble return that you mentioned. Statistically, man, like West Virginia's kind of been the same defensively the entire season. They've struggled. Regardless of who they played, like they've played a tough schedule. I mean, they're Penn State, Pittsburgh in non-conference. They played Kansas State in league play. They played Kansas in league play, which we'll talk about them more this week a little bit. And obviously, as Baylor faces them later, but third down defense bad, 4th down defense bad, red zone touchdown percentage bad, explosive plays bad, passing efficiency. I mean, they're just across the board. They struggled defensively, and I've always felt like going into this game that West Virginia's offense was such a big concern. But if Garrett Green's not playing, their ability to say, okay, what are we going to do offensively throwing the football? They could take shots with Garrett Green because of his ability to have a big arm, but also his ability to take off. He could break it for 75 yards at any moment. So there's a lot of pressure on your safeties, which we know Baylor struggles at safety. But if he's not playing, and right now we don't know, like Neil Brown said after the game, we'll make a decision early in the week, which just tells me they don't know. Like if they're willing to make a decision early in the week, they don't know. I think it's a favorable matchup. The issue is that Baylor has never won in Morgantown. And that's kind of getting the monkeys off your back, but that's a big one to get off. It's going to be a big crowd. I would expect after coming off a win, they have the chance to get the bowl eligibility. West Virginia does. And then the potential, if they win out, they have an outside shot of reaching the Big 12 championship game. It'll be very difficult for that to happen, but they do have a shot to do it.
And they got manageable games after the Baylor game with UCF and Texas Tech. I mean, winnable. I mean, they're still going to be tough, but winnable games, I would say. And West Virginia's at 5-4 now. Cincinnati, I mean, they ran for 157 yards. They threw for 279 yards. It felt like they could kind of do whatever they wanted after they had that middle period where just everything fell apart for them. Once they kind of regrouped, settled in, they were able to move the football on West Virginia pretty consistently. And that bodes really well for Baylor. The problem is also this game was at Cincinnati. And so I think it's important to mention that, Baylor's going to have to go to Morgantown. Baylor's going to have to figure out a way to win in Morgantown. And, a few teams have been able to do that this year. So it's not insurmountable, right. But Baylor has definitely struggled in that area. I agree with you, though. My biggest thought going into that game was just that West Virginia could score, 38 points on Baylor, and win the game, just outscore Baylor and be able to hang with Baylor offensively and maybe go into a situation where Baylor's put in a bind where it's like 17-3 because West Virginia is just on fire offensively. And then maybe things fall apart on Baylor because their offense is playing so well. But if it's this version of West Virginia, I would be just kind of stunned if Baylor didn't play pretty good defense, and if Baylor didn't honestly win the game, because Jaheim White's a good runner. He's a good player, but I mean, Cincinnati's defense is not good. And West Virginia ran for 92 yards.
Yeah, which
Like,
was shocking to me. Like I saw that
yeah,
number and I was like very surprised because
but
they
it's
do run
because
the
there's
ball
no
well.
Garrett Green. That's a huge part of it. Like when the defense has to plan up for that and adapt to that play by play, right? The possibility of him keeping it, it's huge. And we've seen that. You know, at Baylor, when they haven't had a quarterback that can run the football, at times you become just a little too obvious. And if your offense line isn't dominating up front, then you can run into issues. And I don't think Cincinnati's defensive front and linebackers are better than Baylor's. So I don't really see a reason why Baylor wouldn't be able to at least come close to matching that.
Yeah. And on the flip side, you look at Brendan Sorsby, the Cincinnati quarterback, 25 of 36 for 279. The issue were the turnovers. He had the fumble, the inexplicable turnover at the end of the game where he was trying to make a play, but he threw it and it was a lateral, and then they scooped and scored. And it wasn't even it was a forced pressure. He should have taken the sack, eaten the play, and continued to drive down the field. But he had 279 yards passing, 48 yards rushing, and a touchdown. So 2 touchdowns overall. But the issue was his QBR, which there's a lot of factors that go in this. As good as those numbers were, he had the interception, he had the fumble, and his QBR dropped from probably an 80-ish type game to a 38.9 with those 2 turnovers. They ran the ball. Corey Kiner, 91 yards. Overall, 157 yards. And West Virginia has shown a pretty good rush defense this year. But in general, Cincinnati doesn't run the ball, and they still rush for 157 yards. I don't know what the sack numbers. We'll get more into that in our episode tomorrow. But, yeah, like I think to me, if this game's played in Waco, think about last year. That game was a 3-point game. Baylor should have won that game for all the issues they had. I mean, West Virginia kicks it. They scored a touchdown with 33 seconds left, right?
I know, but Richard Reese back-to-back kick returns. You can't count on that.
I'll take it, man.
You can't count on
that. Not that. But Baylor's offense was Sawyer Robertson moving the ball on West Virginia, and that's what I was going towards with this. West Virginia's defense, dating back to when Baylor played there in 2022, their secondary has struggled. Think about Blake. Remember that start to the game in 2022 with Blake Shapen? He was like on fire before the concussion, like all the way. They're going to win this game. End up getting the concussion, fell apart. They lose by 3 points. They've struggled, and those struggles continue in their secondary. Like they've been really bad in the secondary. I think if this game was played in Waco, you would say maybe 6-point favorite. And the way the line shapes up in this one, Baylor opens at basically, or it's around Baylor's a 1.5 point favorite right now at the time of recording this. So that kind of lines up. If they're playing this game at home, maybe it's a 4-point game. But yeah, I think that you feel good about this matchup. And before I saw that, I felt pretty good. But then you see the line, you're a favorite at home. I mean, on the road over West Virginia, Vegas kind of believes the same way you do, even though the advanced metrics still are kind of like right in the middle. I mean, 1.5 point line is still very close. Don't get me wrong. But like Baylor's played Utah. There's a lot of these things that are factoring into Baylor's advanced analytics that hinder what their overall capabilities are. I just feel good about Baylor in this matchup. I just worry about it being in Morgantown.
Right. If Garrett Green does not play in this game, then I'm probably going to pick Baylor to win this game.
Yeah.
If he does play.
I don't know if we'll know. I don't know if they're going to come out and say that or not.
And that's going to be tough to project. But I think in general, after this matchup, I was very intrigued to see how West Virginia would look coming off of a bye. They replaced their defensive coordinator, right, as well.
They fired their defensive coordinator, which made sense as much that he's been there every year with Neil Brown until this year, and they've struggled mightily. I mean, they have been. Neil Brown is a really good football coach, but defensively, I've really been surprised of how much they've struggled defensively.
Right. And so I think in general, I was just curious kind of what this would look like going into this week, because it felt like a game that they needed to win in many ways, kind of like the Tech game for Baylor. Just a game that you felt like, okay, they need to figure out a way to win this game, kind of turn their season in the right direction. Just, build for the fan base, show them wins, all of those things. And they got it done, but it just was not an impressive way of getting it done. Like the way they got it done does not translate to future games, if that makes sense. Like you're not going to win games like this. And so that's what kind of bodes well for Baylor, that West Virginia probably won a game they shouldn't have won. And now they're going to come into this game, and Baylor's coming off a bye in which, maybe Baylor's in kind of a beyond get right spot because they've won 3 in a row, but in a spot where they're just kind of, again, building on the momentum that they had before the bye week. So yeah, very intrigued. I would say that after this matchup though, yeah, I definitely feel a little bit better about kind of, where Baylor is at going into this matchup, I think, compared to West Virginia.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the surface, the win was big for West Virginia to get one step closer. I think the difference is that what Neil Brown's kind of already had his get right moment, and that was last year. And then this year they've struggled. They've kind of reverted to where fans are frustrated. They want to change. Obviously, the concession possibly was changing defensive coordinators, whereas Baylor's kind of like they're a year behind. It's like Baylor can continue to have this run and build on that, but then where does it go next year if they continue to do it? So to put that Cincinnati game in perspective, though, I think I saw the post-game win expectancy based on all the stats from that game was Cincinnati like 80%. That wasn't SP plus, but like you got to feel, if you're a Cincinnati fan, you're sick about that game because you won in every, that's how important turnovers are. You won that game in every single area except turnovers. And both of or 2 of your 3 turnovers were direct 14 points. And that was more than the difference in the game. You eliminate those and you win by 7. And obviously a lot of other factors can come into play in there, but those were direct scores because your offense just gave the ball up.
Right. And I haven't seen if Parker Fleming has put out his graphic that he does weekly where it's, how bad did we get beat? And it's going to be like West Virginia and Cincinnati is going to be at the way far end of the spectrum because it's going to be Cincinnati basically beating West Virginia. But obviously West Virginia found a way to win that game. So very curious about that. If I see it, we can talk about it tomorrow. But yeah, it's just a very interesting game and a very interesting perspective. I think that kind of reshapes my thinking going into this game, as well as, couple other results. Houston and Kansas are still fighting, still out there, just trying to get wins. I do want to mention with Kansas really quickly, they still have to go to BYU and they still have to play Colorado if they're hoping to remain bowl eligible heading into that Baylor game, which I do not see happening. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I honestly did not see them being at this point, though, to still say
we're
fighting for bowl eligibility. They have rebounded, and I was looking at their numbers, and we're getting a little long here. But 7 of their top receivers are seniors. Their top running backs are senior, and obviously Jalen Daniels. They were banking on this year being a Big 12 championship type of year, and now they're fighting for bowl eligibility. So I think they've done a good job of continuing to fight despite all of everything that's happened. But if they don't have a carrot in the stick with the bowl game, where are they at the end of the season? Then obviously talking about Houston next week and everything, they were off this past weekend. So Baylor has you want to get that 6 wins sooner rather than later. You don't want to go in the last game against Kansas trying to get a final 6 win. And the pressure's obviously turned up in that particular game. So any final thoughts on the Baylor basketball win over Arkansas or the upcoming game against West Virginia?
Just excited for another week, as these teams continue to try to build, Baylor football later in the season, Baylor men basketball, just kind of getting things started. So it'll be fun to talk about as we kind of go forward. But I think it was a pretty good week, even with the Gonzaga game, kind of being the eyesore. I think in general, it was a good week for Baylor sports, and, women's basketball got their first win of the season. And so there's a lot that volleyball's playing well. So a lot of good things, I think, going on right now with Baylor sports.
Yeah. All right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports. Thank you to each of you for listening to this episode. Tune in tomorrow and every single day this week. And have a great Monday and sick and Bears.